Okay, good morning. We ended off last week, if I recall correctly, abruptly leading into a Rashbash. We were going to talk about a Chuvas Rashbash. Now the shaila that we were discussing was that seemingly, I'll just recap this. We're going to move in a shtickle different direction, but we'll, let me just recap it anyhow. We opened up a question about running away in the time of a plague. And we said that seemingly it's, not so clear that you should be able to do that, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if he wants to find you and kill you, could find you wherever you are. And if he sent something, if every bullet has a name, he sent in something for you, running away is not going to help. Why would it help? And we spoke through the Paiskim and the minig of running away, and that seems to be the custom. The Ramah brings it, minig of a Torah, and that seems to be. And then we said that essentially it's a deeper hashkafa question that needs to be addressed, meaning, is there such a thing as dying when it's not your time? Is it how does that work? And we mentioned the Gemara in Chagiga that seems to mention Yesh Nispa B'lei Mishpat. The Gemara darshans a pasuk that a person could die when it's not his proper time. And I said that there's a chuvas from the Rashbash, who's the Tashbitz's son, who's a 550-year-old borderline Rishon, probably a Rishon still, chuva from a Rishon that discusses this in depth. And I wanted to just sample it. Now the truth is that B'taich L'Tshuva, he opens up a whole nother vista to this question. So I'm going to start with that question, and then we'll incorporate the Rashbash into the next nidin. Now that's as follows. Essentially, forget about running away from a plague. Every time a person has an ingrown toenail and he wants to go to a doctor, he could have the same question. Hashem gave you the ingrown toenail because he wants you to have the ingrown toenail. So why are you running to a doctor to remove it? Ulamayla b'kodesh, meaning you could take very severe illnesses and you could say, yeah, if I don't treat this illness, it means the person's going to die. Too bad. Hu ha-moichitz, hu ha-reifa, like the Ramah's words were. If Hashem gave you an illness, Hashem knows about this, he sent it for you, meaning essentially by every medical crisis that a person faces in his life, you could have this question. And I just want to share a few stories relating to this question, and then we'll go into the real core machlekes rishonim about it, and we'll circle back to the epidemic discussion. And as follows, there's a new sefer that came out, it's called Mei Hadas. It's from Reb Meir Heisler. He's an Israeli Rosh Yeshiva. He's a chassid who dreizach by a lot of Litvish yeshivas, so he has a very beautiful blend of all the things. And he gave a lot of hespedim and zechronis about different gedalim, and he writes of something shocking. I was shocked when I read it. He writes about the stipler, that when the stipler was old, he got some sort of infection, and the only way to treat it needed constant treatment. The only way to treat it was to allow a doctor to touch and insert things in an area that he felt wasn't sneas. And the stipler said he's not allowing it to happen, doesn't matter what. And in this Sefer Mei Hadas, he writes that the stipler died from this infection. I read it a few months ago. I should have brought it here to read it, but this is what he says. He brings the stipler would not let a doctor, even though he knew what the stakes were, and the stakes taka what they were what they were, and the stipler ends up dying from this illness, he wouldn't allow it. Another story that I always liked, I always remember this, is the Netziv, it seems, the Shiva Valajin, who was a pretty, regular type of person, never liked to go to doctors. He didn't like, anytime something was wrong, he wouldn't ask a doctor. If something was bothering him, an illness, he would go into his room, he would sit down, he would do some sort of cheshbon nefesh, and when he figured out what he felt was the reason why he was ill, he would work on it, and that was it. And one time, the Netziv was ill with something, and he couldn't resolve it, and he sent a message that he'd like the doctor to come. And everybody was shocked that the Netziv was breaking protocol and having a doctor come, but the Netziv asked, and the doctor came, and the Netziv sat with him a little, and the doctor asked him, what's your symptoms, what's bothering you? The Netziv described for him exactly where the pain is, what his symptoms are, and the doctor listens, and he says, okay, yeah, that sounds like, an infection of the gallbladder. And what I'm going to prescribe to you, and the Netziv said, thank you very much, here's your payment, have a wonderful day. And they said, I don't understand, Rabbi, you brought him here because you didn't know what to do. The minute he tells you what it is and starts telling you a prescription, you send him out the door. So the Netziv said, no, you don't understand. I was having conflicting symptoms and I couldn't place which aver would this be from. What did I do that caused me this? And when I realized how he described it, that all these symptoms add up to this illness, I said, oh, now I know what it is. I know how to deal with this. This is the story they say about the Netziv. A shocking story that I saw, and this, I looked high and low for this. There's a letter. I saw it in a tshuva from the Kleisenberger Rav, and I'll read you the way he says it, but I looked high and low for the Etzem letter. I can't find it. But he brings as follows. He says his great-grandfather, this is the founder of the Zidichover Chassidim, Kamarna Zidichov. This is Rav Tzvi Hersh Zidichover, who's an early Rebbe. I think he dies in 1830s, 1832 maybe he dies. I'll tell you why the date's important. He dies in 1832, and I'll tell you why that's important. He says, I found a letter from the Zidichover who sent Mechtavei Ha'aruch L'Kila K'teish Munkach. He sent a Langa letter to Munkach, where I believe his Talmud, the Bnei Yisascha, the Din of Rav, who later went to Munkach, was the Rav there. V'shegilu le'min Hashemayim. He told the Munkach Rav that it was Niskalatim in Hashemayim Sh'la Yelchu Az L'Reifa. No one should go to the doctor. The advice is there was something going on. Now, I couldn't track it down exactly, but L'Chaira, it's the same cholera epidemic that we've been talking about in so many different shurim that came up. In 1831, there was a major cholera epidemic that swept through these areas. L'Chaira, it's the same cholera epidemic, which at its height was killing 6,000 people a day in Galicia in Russia, where Jews lived. So it was a tremendous, tremendous epidemic when it struck where it struck. But he instructed the town of Munkach, Shegilu le'min Hashemayim, Sh'la Yelchu Az L'Reifa. They shouldn't go to doctors. Mamasha Milsa D'Tmiya, and I don't know what the repercussions of this is, and I don't know, I couldn't piece together the rest of the story. I tried to find it. Supposedly it's printed in a Sefer Pri Kadesh Ilulim, which is a Zidacheva Sefer and Pri Etz Chaim. I looked. Maybe I'm just not finding it. If somebody knows where it is, please show it to me. I looked for the letter. I want to see the whole letter in its entirety, and I would love to get the date of when this is. But it's Yitachan that it's during this cholera epidemic in the early in 1830 and 1831, and the Zidacheva is instructing the Munkach not to let his chassidim go to doctors. Now, you have to know that in those days, the doctors were the tip of the spear of a lot of the haskala that was going on. A lot of the doctors, who even in a little shtetl, a doctor had to have been someone who went to college, who was educated. He'd be a German-speaking, transplant. It wasn't, the butcher and the doctor weren't the same type of people. The butcher you didn't have to worry about. The doctor was usually a German-educated, very open-minded, clear maskil, who would often be like the tip of the spear in a little town, or a little shtetl that was full of Chassidish Yidden or Elach Yidden, and there would be like a doctor there who, every time he came for a prescription, he also got a little kvira. So there is a lot of source material that Rebbes and the Zidacheva, and particularly the Bnei Yisascha, the Dineveh, who he's writing to, had pre-existing beef with the doctors. They weren't, the doctors, local doctors were a problem, and it could be that that's what the Zidacheva is referring to, and it has nothing to do with the sugya that we're discussing, or not. The Kleisberger brings it in context of the sugya of going to doctors b'chlal, like in the sugya of getting a refuah when Hashem makes you ill. It's idea I still need to see the letter. I don't know. Anyhow, just another like shocking story, especially if it happened during that period when we know the type of death that was wrought throughout these kehilas. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people could have died in these kehilas that were avoiding doctors. Not that a doctor could really cure a cholera epidemic, but perhaps. Rabbi Kveger, Al Kapanim, we see, took their word seriously. Rabbi Kveger was incorporating it into his, there's more than one way to look at that, Al Kapanim. In any case, so really we have this core question on the table of going to a doctor or seeking help or running from a plague when clearly Hashem made you sick, Hashem sent it in your direction, you think you're going to beat the system. What's going on over here? So I want to start with the tshuva from the Rashbash that we mentioned, and then we'll move on to the more klolistic machlekes rishonim. The Rashbash is a fascinating tshuva, and it goes against a lot of what we have as like a predetermined munach that we know, something that we believe, that I think everyone in this room will be a little bit shocked by what the Rashbash says. The Rashbash, his shaila is as follows: Sha'alta Hanisa b'yimei dever, running away during a time of a plague, mimakam l'makam, im tayel adam elai. His question is like a hashkafa question: will it help or not? Not is it allowed or not? Will it help? Does it have any chance of helping you? B'chlal. Shem nichtav b'Rosh Hashanah l'misa, matei leinu hanasiya. If a person was nichtav in Rosh Hashanah to die that year, what's it going to help him to run away? Hashem can't find you in the new city. V'im nichtav l'chayim, leitazikenu amid. If a person was nigza that he's going to live, it doesn't matter what's swirling around him. He could be mamish bullets whizzing by his head. He's going to live anyhow. This is the Rashbash's question. Says the Rashbash, tshuva. Kol adam yesh leketz katzav mispar yemei chayav. Every person when he's born has a set amount of years that he's going to live. V'davazeh katzav b'teira es mispar yemecha amalei shani b'neviim hineni moisav al yemecha v'sholish b'ksuvim ha'dieni Hashem kitzai mudiver rabbeinu parakena mudar kivin shabbat kitzah shaladam. He brings many rayas that every person is born with a predetermined, designated amount of years in his life. He's going to live whatever it is that he's going to live. But he says there are things, he says, that are ma'arach a person's life, and things that shorten a person's life. For example, there are a whole set of averis that if a person does them, it shortens his life. Either he's chayiv in kares, v'ariri, or any of the other mises b'dei shemayim. There are all sorts of averis that a person does, and chet is mekatzer. A person, the Gemara tells us, come out, nobody dies b'lei chet. Chet is mekatzer shneisav shaladim. Chet could cause a person to die younger. And then he says there are things that are marach a person's life. There are mitzvahs, l'man yirich and yamecha, specific mitzvahs. There are 2 mitzvahs in the Torah, and many other mitzvahs that are a skula for arichas yamim. V'chayisa v'rabisa, l'man yirbu yamechem, v'dameim, v'zeh kula b'avtacha, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave avtachas. Mitzad ha'inish gamken, yirani akrisus, misa b'dei shemayim, and Vaisifim b'idei Kabbalah, many other things, and today many, many more things, different school lists for all sorts of different things that either marach a person's life or makatzer a person's life. He says a person's born with a designated amount of time, but there are so many things that could change that, either because of Averis or because of mitzvahs. Al-Kain Omer Ani Lefi Kaitzer Sichli says, I say, this is something that I think. Mi she'ein b'yadei Averim mechayeves mitzvah v'kaitzer yamim. Anybody who doesn't have an Aveir that makes him deserve to die younger, will live nishar al ketz hakatzav mispri yimei chayev. Will just live the amount of years he's supposed to. U'b'Rosh Hashanah einay niden lebechayim v'lebemavis. I think that's a very shocking part that I don't think most people think. I don't think we think this. I don't know if this is how Klal Yisrael atangenumen. On Rosh Hashanah, this person does not even have a din about living or dying. He had one din when he was born, where Hashem said you can live X amount of years. He didn't do any major averis or major mitzvahs that changed it. He does not even go to Beis Din Shamayla about life and death on this Rosh Hashanah. He just stays with his predetermined amount, and whenever it's time, he's going to die. That's what the Gemara Chazal refers to Misa B'leichat. Amru, this is a wild thing. The Gemara in Shabbos says, Ein Misa B'leichat. There's no such a thing as dying without an Avera. Einay Maimer Muskim. It's a wild thing. He says, that's not a Maimer Muskim. That's one day in the Gemara. There is people who die B'leichat. There's all sorts of people who die B'leichat. Now he says, the person who does not have a din this year, if he's going to die or he's going to live, he's just riding on the old wave about when he's supposed to die. That's the person that the Torah says, maybe he'll die during war. And i.e., maybe he'll die in a magefa, maybe he'll die in a carjacking, maybe he'll die in a shooting. There are all sorts of things that could happen to him. He says, on this person, he's the type of person who has to be concerned about what's going on around him. He says, and this is a person, he says, who could be healthier, who could lead I want to find you the exact words, but he could lead a healthier lifestyle. He says, he's not in the Rosh Hashanah case. He's the person who has to be concerned about health and longevity and doing exercise and eating properly. He's like an open slate. The person who does not have who doesn't have an aveira or a mitzvah that's killing him, and he just has his 70, 80 years to live out, or 90 or 100, whatever the person was, got to predetermine. He has to be careful. He could get killed in a war. He could get killed in a car accident. He could eat the wrong foods. He's the guy who has to be careful. He says, you want to know who should run from a magefa? It's this category of people. He says, you're right. Someone who's nigzer l'chaim is going to live wherever it is. Literally, the entire apartment building that he lives in, everybody could die of the plague, and he's going to live a gesundte lang 11. Somebody who's nichtav lemisa, he's going to die no matter what. He could run and run. He could run thousands of miles away. He could run to a beach in Tahiti, and he's going to die anyhow from a plague that struck, Belarus. There's no way to escape it. But you want to know who the people that could escape it? It's people that don't have a gzar din this Rosh Hashanah about life and death. Which I don't think any. We're not going to go into the Gemaras and the sources that are connected this, but meaning. Like he says, the Gemara is the Ein Davar HaMuskim. L'chayr, this tshuva from the Rashbash is not a Davar HaMuskim. Kol Deis HaRishayim. We could cite chapter verse, but that's not today's discussion. In any case, the Rashbash, he says that this is a svara that he has. V'chein mikublani mi b'derech ha'emes. This is a Kabbalah that he has. Whatever you want to make of that. That there's these three categories. There's the living, the dying, and the blank, the neutral. The neutral are the ones who have to be careful. Neutral people, he says, have to eat well, have to get exercise, get enough REM sleep, run from a plague. This is who he's talking about. This is how the Rashbash resolves this conflict. It's a long tshuva. It's pages and pages long, and he goes I'm just trying to snapshot the few little synopsis pieces that he says. Now, according to this Rashbash, so the Rashbash is kind of making a pshara from the different studim. We asked, how does it help to run? Why is it hashkafically help to run? So the Rashbash is saying you don't know which category you're in. You never know if you're from those who are nigzer l'chaim l'mavis, or you're just a blank slate. A blank slate has to run. Everyone's makbid to run. If a person knows, and Navi told him that he was nigzer l'chaim for this year, he's nothing to worry about, then Yitak has nothing to worry about. He could stay during no matter what type of danger it is, and he'll be fine. Now let's turn our attention to the question of doctors. Because I'll tell you the reason why I thought to do this is because the Rashbash in his tshuva over here says. He says, "V'chein toil for these people Hanhaga Teva B'Shmir Sabrius, Basaras Min Chayli, good health hygiene. V'zeh Amr Mebrachas Parakarayah, Babakam Parakakacha Chayvel, V'kan Shanit and Rishus L'Reifel Rapis. On this category of people, who's the gray area people, the people who are blank slate, on them it was said, V'kan Nit and Rishus L'Reifel Rapis. They're the people that doctors are for. Meaning, people who are going to live, they don't need a doctor. People are going to die, a doctor's not going to help them. These people was the doctor said for. So now let's turn our attention to the discussion of using doctors, b'chlal, and then how that plays out. And there's a very famous Ramban in Parshas B'chukaisei, where the Ramban says a startling thing. The Ramban says like this. The Ramban says, V'aklal, he says, Ki b'heyois Yisrael shleimim v'hin rabim, lo yisnagu inyanim b'tev aklal. When Klal Yisrael is shleimim and rabim, we'll have to see what that means. It's a big area of dispute. Inyanei teva don't affect them at all. Not even in a single individual from them. Hashem will bench their lachmum, their parnasa, and remove all machla from amongst them. They won't need a doctor b'chlal. And they won't have to worry about doing exercise and eating healthy. Klal Yisrael, in some level, has no use for doctors and no use for medical law. Like Hashem says, I am the one who heals you. That's what tzaddikim would do b'zman nevuah. Gam ki yikram avoin sheyechlu, even if they would be befallen by an illness. They wouldn't ask a doctor anything. They would just ask neviim. Like the pasuk in Malachim Beis tells us about Chizkiah, that Chizkiah called for the navi when he was ill. And then the Ramban brings Davar Vivuchay. This is a passing Divrei Yamim that tells us how bad of a king Asa was, how terrible of a Rasha Asa was. Even when he was sick, he didn't look for Hashem, he only darshan Bereifim. Like Ramban's learning from there, you see, like when a person's sick, Kavachayim, you're not going to doctors. That's when, what is it? Asa was? So I guess it's Sama critique. I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. It's about Asa. I'm pretty sure it's Asa. We'll look it up after. V'amar akasav gam b'chol yledar shesem ki b'reifim v'ilo ha'edvar ha'reifim noag behem matam sheyasker ha'reifim ein ha'ashem rak b'avash yledar shesem. If reifim are negeya, so why is it a taina that he asked doctors? He should just say he didn't daven enough. Meaning, if the taina is he's supposed to daven while you ask, should have said that. Elamai says, you see, doctors are not supposed to play a role b'chlal. Matam shizkar say ein ha'ashem rak b'avash aval hu kasher yomer ha'adam le'oicha pleni matzah b'chag matzahs kiyim chametz. He says going to a doctor, the Ramban says, is like a person saying le'oicha pleni matzah b'chag matzahs kiyim chametz. It's like eating chametz instead of matzah. As like the Ramban. So the Ramban takes a very, very strident position, a very strong position, and says, good Jews don't need doctors. Adrabah, and then he continues on, he says, Hashem benavi, yiddish b'reifim, and this is like the punchline line, this is like the headline that sticks in the Ramban. He says, Hashem. Why are doctors in the household of someone who's Hashem? They don't belong there. This is what the Ramban says. And this Ramban is really the source of the Netziv and the Stipler and the Zidacheva. This is the Ramban that lays the groundwork, that stakes out the high road, the high position over here. That a good Jew who's doing the right thing has no use for doctors, doesn't need doctors. Doctors are forget. That's not what he's looking for. This is what the Ramban seems to say. Now, we have to see, A, if the halacha is like this Ramban, do we paskin like this Ramban? And B, does the Ramban himself mean this la halacha? Is what he's saying, mamash halacha dika thing? It's Ramban al Torah. Does he mean this la halacha or not? So now, let's first say the chaylik's position. The chaylik is equally strong. The Ramban over here speaks in no uncertain terms, and the chaylik, who's none other than the Rambam, as well speaks in no uncertain terms. There's no gray area. The Rambam is as follows. There's a Gemara in Brachas. It's two places actually. It's a Mishnah in Psachim and a Brisa in the Gemara in Brachas that says as follows. Shisha dvar masach Chizkiyahu HaMelech. 6 innovations Chizkiyahu HaMelech did. Al shleisha haydulai. On 3 the Chachamim were masking him. Al shleisha haydulai. And 3 the Chachamim were not masking him. Now one of them is Gana Sefer Refuos v'haydulai. He hid the Sefer Refuos, the book of medicine. Klal Yisrael at that time, Api Meseira, we say that Shlomo Melech was the one who wrote the book. Shlomo HaChacham Mikol Adam wrote the medical book, and Klal Yisrael had, like Yerusha Savas, Klal Yisrael owned a special medical book, and Chizkiyahu took it and he was gonna as that Sefer Refuos v'haydulei. The Chacham were masking to him. So the mashmayis is that getting rid of medicine and taking medical knowledge away from Klal Yisrael seemed to have been a benefit. Chizkiyahu did the equivalent of closing down, all the relief and every medical referral agency that Klal Yisrael benefits tremendously. This runs against everything that Jews are today. Meaning we know, Jews are busy with doctors on the highest level. But Chizkiyahu shut it down. Chizkiyahu said, no more GoFundMes for medical referral agencies. Shut it down, waste time, bad. The Chacham agreed to him. This is what the Gemara is mashma. Now, the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos, in the Mishnah in Psachim, brings as follows. He says as follows. He says, he brings the Gemara. He says as follows. He says, one second, I just want to find you the exact sprach. He says as follows. He says, there are people who say, from this they learn, Lefi Svarasam HaMeshubeshes, Hashtusis, Ha'adam Hashayira V'yifna Halechem. One second, the Rambam says there are people who learn from this that when a person gets sick, he's supposed to stay away from doctors. He's not supposed to go to doctors, he says. And he says, Lefi Svarasam HaMeshubeshes Hashtusis, Lefi their messed up idea that's a shtos, he says, Ha'adam Hashayirav V'yifna Halechem V'yechelu. A person who's hungry and he turns to bread and he eats it. And certainly by eating a good sandwich, your hunger will go away. It's as if he doesn't have bitachon HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, if you're telling me that when a person gets sick, he's not supposed to go to a doctor, he's not supposed to take the potion that's supposed to be helpful for him, that's like telling me that a person when he gets hungry, he shouldn't eat a loaf of bread, he shouldn't have a sandwich. He says, just like when a person eats, he says, thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So too, thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu when the refuah, when the medicine works for you. So the Rambam calls it shtos with shaitim, and the Rambam is harshly against the position. He says there are those who want to take out of this Gemara that a person is supposed to avoid medicine, and medicine is not good for a Jew. Nishdemes, medicine is like food. They're both side the Rambam, side the Ramban are using the food mashal. Medicine is like food, and just like you thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'achalta v'savata v'irachta, so too achalta v'ripisa v'irachta. You have a refuah from the medicine you took. Say thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and go weiter. Hashem put this in the world. Then he brings the famous Gemara, the Gemara Baba Kama, elsewhere that the Gemara says, Mikan Shnit Rishos L'Reif L'Rapeh. And the Gemara in Brachas really has an interesting thing. The Gemara in Daf Samach in Brachas says an interesting thing. The Gemara tells us that when a person goes to do Akazas Adam, he has to say like a tefillah, where, I'll read you the Gemara. The Gemara says you should say a tefillah as follows. The Gemara says, Hanichnas lahakis dam, and the Rambam uses this Gemara also. Gemara Daf Samach on base. Hanichnas lahakis dam. Omer yihiratzim ufanach Hashem alekai sheyeisik ze li lerefuah v'terapeni kikel roi fenem and atav refuas chaemes lefi she'ein dakrin shabenelden lerapos ela shenagu. This is the Tana de Rebbe Shmuel says as follows, that it's not normal that a person should get healed, to go to a doctor and get healed, but kach nagu adam. So almost like we say a sheepish tefillah. It's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I know I'm doing something stupid, and I'm not living up to what I'm supposed to be living up to, but like, thank you, I guess, for like healing me in this. That's what the Tana of Rebbe Shmuel says. That's how the Gemara sounds like it's saying. Amar Abaye comes and says, Le'lemru in a shachi. A person shouldn't say this. The Tana of Rebbe Shmuel, V'rapi Yerapim, Mikan Shnit Rishos L'Reif L'Rapos. This is where Abaye comes. Abaye says, no, don't say that. Don't be sheepish about getting healed. Tana of Rebbe Shmuel, Mikan Shnit Rishos L'Reif L'Rapos. The Gemara Baba Kama, Gemara in Brachas, a reifa. Now it's talking about the reifa's permission, but vice versa, if a reifa has permission, the victim also has permission. And don't be so sheepish about it. Now most Rishonim learn, and the Rambam learns this on steroids, that the machlekes, this is a machlekes in the Gemara. The Deya Kamaisa that says there's some sort of sheepish tefillah when a person is having refuah seems to hold stay away from medicine. Medicine's subpar. It's b'diavad. And the Deya Hashniya Abaye, who's bringing from Tana de Rebbe Shmuel, is being chaylik, and he's saying no, medicine is fine. Don't be so sheepish about it. This is what Hashem put in the Bria. Hakadosh Baruch Hu is maskim. Hiskim Hakadosh Baruch Hu. This is how it should be done. So this is the Rambam's Deya that says that we learn from the Gemara in Brachas on Daf Samach and the Gemara Baba Kama, that a person is allowed to. It's like eating bread when a person's hungry. Just say thank you. Just do what you're supposed to. And I Chizkiyo, he says Chizkiyo hid away a book that was not Ois Gehalten. There was refuahs in there that were not Ois Gehalten. Either they had to do with Avodah Zarah, or people were not having B'tachon B'chlal anymore. And the Rambam Madcha that Gemara, he says that Gemara is not a raya. So here you have two of the Gedolei Rishonim, the highest tier Rishonim, the Rambam and the Ramban, who are arguing about this very, very core question of what is a person supposed to do when he gets ill. Now, the truth is that this machlekes, not machlekes, but this question is actually a sif in Shulchan Aruch. It makes it the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch in Yeridei and Shin Lamed Vav says as follows. In Shin Lamed Vav, it's a short sif. It says as follows: Nitna ha'Torah rishus l'reif l'rapos u'mitzvahi. The Torah gave rishus to reif l'rapos, and it's a mitzvahi. U'bechlal pikuach nefeshu. V'menei ha'atzmei reis a shefach damim. Now this is talking about a doctor probably. Even if the guy has another doctor, maybe that's not the doctor who's going to be zeicha to heal him. You have to do it. And the Rambam goes on. Now the Shulchan Aruch seems to be paskening a little bit of a steer. The Shulchan Aruch says Nitna ha'Torah rishus l'reif l'rapos, which is lashon rishus, which is what the Gemara says. Mitzvahi u'b'chlal pikuach nefeshi. So which one is it? If it's pikuach nefesh, agret yulad. Meaning if the Shulchan Aruch's learning that going to a doctor is just beged pikuach nefesh, that's v'chai behem. That's facing dachim kol Torah kula. Then v'chai behem. it's some sort of special mitzvah, and the Taz picks up on this. Taz says as follows, he says, Kasha, keeping the be'emes mitzvah, lama kari l'tchil l'rishus. If it's a mitzvah, why calling it a rishus? Venera, he says, the hachi kavanas inyan zeh. The Taz says, here's the pshat. The refuah amitis who are people are kashas rachamim the mishmaya. The true refuah is by asking by kashas rachamim from Shemayim. Yesh le refuah k'mash kasav machatzti v'niyerpa, which is the pasuk that we started from. That's the Ramah. That's what our starting point. 2 weeks ago he says. Ela she'ein ha'adam zeicha lekach. A person is not zeicha to that. Ela tzarich lasses refuah al piteva ha'olam. Who yisparach hiskim al zeh v'nasan ha'refuah yidei teva ha'refuahis v'zen nit n'rishus shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'kimet shekvar ba ha'adam l'dei kach yesh chiyav al arei lasses refuahis. So the Taz is threading the needle over here. The Taz says, be'etzem, there's a lofty ideal somewhere. There's a highbrow something somewhere that says that a person shouldn't need doctors. Almost like the Ramban, which is what this is really based on. Like the Ramban's day, Machatzli v'niyerpa, a person doesn't need a doctor. Mal arei b'beis Yirei Elikim, we're above that. But l'maisa, what should we do? People are not zeicha. And if people are not zeicha, then it's already a mitzvah and a chiyuv, and it's v'chai behem. So Mela and v'hiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yadam v'rapa yirapa. Hashem was maskim to that. So Mela, it's a mitzvah, it's a chiyuv, but he says the Shulchan Aruch here is trying to express the aspirational ideal of l'maisa, strive for better. Refuah really comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's really the ideal circumstance. Of l'maisa, latmin and olam ha'maisa, mikan shenidu rishus l'reif l'rapa is v'kachiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu al yadam. So now, what's fascinating about this is that the Taz is not charting an evolution of like he's saying, Bimei Anavim, they did A. Bimei Chazal, B. And now, Achshav, it's a Shvach Hadar, we do C. The Taz is going all the way back to the Gemaras, and is bringing a raya from Gemaras, that there's a higher, the Gemara knew there was something that you're supposed to stay away from doctors, but Afal Pikim, you can't just the for the rappers. The Gemara itself, Abaye is telling you, he's learning Abaye, that Abaye is telling you, Hiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yadam, but this is already Mechazal. This is at a very early stage that Hiskim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yideim that we could have refuahs. Now, this Taz is learning the Shulchan Aruch, that it's based on the Ramban, and it is the source of almost every din in Hilchos Avelos. This whole section of Shulchan Aruch is from the Ramban. It's a fascinating thing. I don't think there's any other area in Shulchan Aruch where it's such a like a copy paste. Like the Mechaber is so exclusively relying on the Ramban, like this back 40 siman of Yeridei. Stam, interesting factoid. As is. And this is Taka, the Makar of this din is Taka based on the Ramban. But the way the Taz is interpreting the Ramban, he's limiting the Ramban. The Ramban is talking about some sort of ideal world. There's an ideal world that exists. There's an ideal Ashkafa that exists. But even the Gemara and Brachas, the way he's learning it, is clearly limiting that ideal. Yes, there's an ideal, and what this Ramban is saying is, Hilu, in the ideal world, what Klal Yisrael could be Zeicha to if they do everything right, and when we're Zeicha to all the Brachas, like Subas Vatayra, Ani Hashem Reifecha, and then you don't need doctors at all. But obviously, in the Eilam HaMaisa, now we need doctors. And there are others, the Tzitz Eliezer, for example, in a long tshuva, in Chelik Hey, in Oyel Rachel, in Tshuva Chaf, he brings, Oyel Rachel is a contrast that he put out, Lilun Hashem, his mother. I guess he spent time in a hospital and he was necessary to write all the shilas. He was always busy with medical shilas, but he has Oyel Rachel, a whole contrast on like the death and the dying. So in Simon Chaf over there, he has all arichas, and he brings many rayas that the Ramban himself in Teres Adam, which is the Sefer in Hilchos Avelos, death and dying, which is what this whole back section of Shulchan Aruch and Yeridei is based on. Ramban himself in several places in Teres Adam writes about using doctors. And I'll read you a little bit. He says as follows. The Ramban writes, which is the source of this Sif and Shulchan Aruch. The Ramban himself in Teres Adam is writing, don't say, the Ramban's bringing a raya from Yana Gemara Brachas, and says, don't say that it's just Ein Darken Shmei L'Rapos El Shanagu Ki Hai Rishos. No, it's Rishos the Mitzvah, and it's B'chal Pekuach Nefesh. The Ramban himself, who's the Bala Memra of Mal Reif and Beis Yirei Elikim, is paskening in Teres Adam and is later quoted in Shulchan Aruch as saying that even so, there's some need for doctors. Now there are many achronim have tshuvas about this. The Tzliaz is one, Rabbi Adi has a tshuva. The Kloisenberger Rebbe in Divrei Yatziv in Likutim has a beautiful tshuva about it. He obviously was a founder of a hospital. We know this was personal to him. And actually, the tshuva that he wrote, it's interesting. It's a tshuva in Tafshin Lamed Ches in 78. In 1978, it's after Yom Ne'Ram. Now, anyone who knows how Rebbes work, after Yom Ne'Ram, Rebbes need vacation. The Tkuf of Yom Ne'Ram by a Rebbe is a period of intense work. The amount of personal people that are being met and getting a bracha v'hagizin tiyar, v'hagut kebench tiyar is astronomical if you're a big Rebbe. If anyone's seen the Avodas Hatfilah of the Kloisenberger Rebbe, it's a legendary Avodas Hatfilah. So imagine that Yom Ne'Ram. After Yom Ne'Ram, the Kloisenberger Rebbe needed a vacation, and he writes this in the tshuva. He says, I can't even, the tshuva is written by a kaisiv. He says, I don't even have the energy to write. It's written by a kaisiv. I need a vacation. but you're a donor to my hospital project, and your shaila is about medical things. And I said, it's Pashad Chiv Akar Satayv. How could I not answer a medical question to a donor to the hospital? So it's a tshuva, and he writes, he's a Mamash Bafis Zakaychis. It's a Chavtes Tishrei. But in this tshuva, he has a beautiful tshuva. He brings, both Sadim, and he suggests an interesting angle that L'chaira, very much stems with the Tzliezer and the Teres Adam, etc., is that the Ramban is talking about only Bimei Nevi'im. That's the limitation. It's Bimei Nevi'im. All the rayas the Ramban brings from Melachim and from Divrei Yom, we're talking about when there's a Navi on the scene, Bimei Nevi'im. There was such a thing not to go to Dakim because the Navi could actually tell you what's what. A Navi could tell you what's going on. It's real. He could tell you. But once there's not Yemei Nevi'im, we're not relying on Ruach HaKodesh, we don't have Ruach HaKodesh anymore, and that's Pascha, then a person has to go to doctors. Now, he rather brings a side trip, and we once spoke about this, his Zayda the Chaim's tshuva about having Ruach HaKodesh on his head, or Chaim HaKodesh. So he brings that maybe if tzaddikim still have Ruach HaKodesh, so maybe tzaddikim still has to be the first to address, but Afal Pikein, and he continues on, and he brings this whole thing. So, it's a major Ashkafa Shaila that's telling the grace of Machlekes Rishonim, but Afal Pikein, Puk Chaziyam the bar, and everybody knows that we go to doctors. And it's more of an ideal. It's like a machshava to keep in mind, an ideal that refuah comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to keep that in mind. Although, of course, we go to doctors. Now, there's a few different avenues that I'm thinking to go down over here. We've talked in the past about Kvitlach and Shabbos and like rabbis and sending tefillas to rabbis and etc. I'm not going to revisit the exact same child that we spoke about, but maybe I'll talk about Yelich Etzel Chacham, the Tzaddikim's tefillas, which is a stam interesting subject, or perhaps alternative medicine, which is another very, very big sugya, big mavucha, modern day, big machlekes. And the only reason I'm thinking not to talk about it is because people have very strong opinions about it, but maybe we'll talk about that also. To be continued, we'll see.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.